Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Juta Padakamalam Sri Gurun.
Hare Krishna, welcome back to Bhaktisastri. Om Jnana Timanandasa Jnana Jana Shalakaya Chukshusha Unmilitam Jnana Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shamadi Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tinamane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gaudamani Pachani Nina Vishesha Shamani Pashtati Deshtane Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai. In our last lesson, in the 7th chapter, we were looking at the 4 types of devotees. We were looking at 4 types of people who surrender to the Lord and 4 types who don't surrender. Why a Jnani is considered the most qualified to begin Krishna Bhakti. Why demigod worshippers are considered less intelligent. Prabhupada's mood and Sri Nityananda Prabhu's mood, particularly in delivering the Duskritanaha. How Krishna is covered by the internal potency, and the relevance of Punya Karma in the practice of Krishna Bhakti. In this session, we'll be discussing chapter 8. At the end of chapter 7, in verses 29 and 30, Krishna mentions these various subject matters. And again, in the 8th chapter, verses 1 and 2, Arjuna repeats the same topics, seeking more clarification. As we mentioned, Touch Shrinu, in the beginning of the 7th chapter, Krishna is explaining himself, the process of attaining him, devotional service, Bhagavad Bhakti, and predominantly he is speaking. Arjuna is listening. Right from the 7th chapter, 8th chapter, 9th chapter, Krishna is entirely speaking without interruption. Here, Arjuna just asks a couple of questions in the beginning of the 8th chapter, just a couple of questions to clarify. What was that? Brahman, Adhyatma, Karma, Adibhuta, Adidaiva. Just a couple of questions for clarification. And Krishna elaborates more. In verses 3 and 4, Krishna explains Brahman is Jiva and Parabrahman. Adhyatma, nature of the self, is devotional service. Karma, activity that develops the body in Vedic sacrificial processes. Adibhuta, material manifestation. Adidaiva, universal form, the demigods. And Adijagya, the Paramatma. And then the remaining topic of Prayana Kale, remembering you at the final moment, or the final moment, is further elaborated on throughout the remainder of the chapter. So to conclude the first through 4 verses, Prabhupada comments, in the transcendental association of Krishna consciousness, one can understand how the Supreme Lord is the governing principle of the material manifestation and even of the demigods. Gradually, by such transcendental association, one becomes convinced of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and at the time of death, such a Krishna conscious person can never forget Krishna. Naturally, he is thus promoted to the planet of the Supreme Lord, Goloka Vrindavan. That's purport to text number 30 of the 7th chapter. So the topic of Prayana Kale, the final moment, and how to know you at the time of death, Krishna answers very elaborately, beginning from text number 4, beginning from text number 5. Antakale chamameva shmaram mukta kalevaram ya prayati shamad bhavam yati nashchatra shangshayaha. Antakale, at the final moment, Antakale, the final moment, chamam eva shmaram, those who remember you alone. Prabhupada translates, remembering me alone. Mukta kalevaram, and gives up the body. Ya prayati samadbhavam, at once attains my nature. Yati nashchatra shangshayaha, of this there is no doubt. So in this verse, Krishna specifically answers the question of how to achieve him at the final moment, Antakale, Cha Mama Eva Shmaram, Mama Eva. In this case, Mama Eva means exclusively me. One's exclusively remembering Krishna. Mama Eva Shmaram, Mukta Kalevaram, and gives up that body. at the antakal, the final breath, remembering Krishna, sa prayati samadbhavam, he attains a nature like mine, he attains a body like mine, a spiritual body, yati nashchatra samshaya, of this there is no doubt. The wonderful example we have of attaining Krishna, the final moment of death, is His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada, surrounded by many loving devotees. And you can see the video of Srila Prabhupada, his final moments. And many devotees testified that with his last breath, Prabhupada, of course, it was extremely emaciated and weak in condition, and counting breaths. And then the final breath, clearly it could be heard, Prabhupada said, Hare Krishna, and left his body. Prabhupada teaching the whole world, Acharya, with the whole life, and simply teaching us the process of Krishna consciousness, how to perfect our life. So this is the goal of life. Of course, this is the most important thing. Unfortunately, if we ask you who learned this at school, that at the final moment, if you remember Krishna, you can attain the eternal abode of the Lord. Who learnt this at school? Unfortunately, the schools are not teaching us that. This is the most important thing. Just if we know this, and we can mold our life around achieving this goal, then we can perfect our existence, and we don't have to return to the temporary material world again. However, this sublime knowledge in Gita Upadesh is not known to humanity at large, and therefore Srila Prabhupada has embarked on the glorious mission of spreading Gita Upadesh, Bhagavad Gita Jota Jota, as it is, as Krishna spoke, and spreading that all through humanity. And the followers of Srila Prabhupada, International Society of Krishna Consciousness, this is our mission, to enlighten humanity. It is not difficult, it is not complex philosophy. It is a simple truth. At the end of life, if we remember Krishna, then we can attain the Supreme Abode. And practicing Krishna consciousness, we can prepare ourselves for that, achieving that perfection. So in the next verse, after explaining specifically how to attain Him at the time of death, Krishna now gives the general principle of transmigration. Yam yam vabhishmaram bhavam tajat ante kalevaram tam tam evaiti konteya siddhatad bhava bhavitah. You can see the pattern in the Sanskrit in the verse. Yam yam, and whatever vabhishmaram bhavam, one remembers. And it's interesting that Krishna uses the word bhav, the bhav. Prabhupada translates at state of being. State of being. It involves many things. One's consciousness, one's aspiration, one's mind, one's nature. All of these things can contribute to the state of being at the time of death. So one's very self. Yam yam smaram bhavam. Whatever thoughts, consciousness, or very existence one has developed at the final moment. Tajat ante kalevaram, the final moment. And tajate, gives up his body. Tam tam, yam yam tam tam. Whatever that which, whatever that, Prabhupada translates that, whatever state of being, that state. Yam yam tam tam, there's a pattern in the Sanskrit. Tam tam evaiti kunteya, certainly, sada tad bhava, bhavitaha, tad bhava, that consciousness, that state of being, bhavitaha, he will become. This is further elaborated on in the 13th, this is further elaborated on in the 15th chapter of Gita, where Krishna explains specifically how adhishtaya manaschaham, based on the mind, one achieves a certain set of senses, srutam, chakshu, sparshanam, cha, rasanam, guranam, evacha, eyes, ears, tongue, smell, sense of touch. Adhishtaya manaschaham, based upon the mental conception at the time of death, vishayan upashevayat, and subsequently one is given, one is provided with a body and a group of senses specifically tailor-made for the consciousness, for the acquired desires that the living entity has. In the previous verse, Krishna explains that just like the wind carries aromas, so similarly the consciousness assumes different states of being, different mentalities. Ahankara mata hoya. Narottam Das is singing that we develop a certain identification, ahankar, I am this. And based on that illusory concept of self, one acquires a certain body, Vishayan Upashevayat, and he is basically limited to enjoying. Vishayan is the enjoyment, Upashevayat, is available according to the senses that we have. Prabhupada gives the example in the purport of a dog, that a dog has to act like a dog. You don't see dogs taking bath and wearing suit and having discussions because they don't have the senses to be able to do that. Their senses condemn them to a life of smelling, digging, etc., etc. This is condemned life. And therefore, the importance of the human form of life, that artadam, as Prahlad Maharaj explains, Dharman Bhagavatamiha, Dulavam Manusham Janma Tad Api Adruvam Artadam. Even though the human life is material and is temporary, it is artadam. It is full of significance and value because the human body is developed to such an extent that one can actually Bhagavat Dharman Iha, one can cultivate Krishna Bhakti in the human form of life. One can practice Bhagavad Bhakti and act, create by behavior, by practice, one can actually establish themselves in a spiritual life by serving Krishna. Rishikena Rishikesha Sevanam Bhaktir Uchate. By using the body, by using the senses to serve Krishna, then one can establish oneself and revive one's Krishna consciousness. And similarly, the principle is inherent in the verses that Krishna is speaking here. As a result of cultivating Krishna Bhakti, in the final moment of life, one can remember Krishna and be successful in the mission of life. Prabhupada's commenting in his purport to text number 6, one's thoughts during the course of one's life accumulate to influence one's thoughts at the moment of death. So this life creates one's next. If in one's present life one lives in the mode of goodness and always thinks of Krishna, it is possible for one to remember Krishna at the end of one's life. Prabhupada specifically encourages the practice of deity worship in this connection when he's lecturing on the topic in 1974. The Antakal, at the time of death, at the end of life, Antakal, Chamameva, unto me ever certainly, Shmaram, remembering, deity worship, especially meant for this purpose, so that you go on worshipping the deity of Radha and Krishna. Naturally, you'll be practiced to think of Radha and Krishna always within your heart. The activities recommended by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Shri Sanatana Goswami, Choishati Sadhananga, 64 items of sadhana bhakti, and specifically the 5 items which are particularly recommended by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu include deity worship, sadhu sanganam, kirtan, bhagavat sravan, maturavas sri murtira shraddhaya sevan. Shakal Shadana Shrestha, of all the different items of sadhana bhakti, Pach Anga, these 5 items are particularly recommended and important and stressed by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu because Pache Alpashanga, even a little of these 5 or even only one of these 5, Pache Alpashanga, with a little association with any of these 5 items, Krishna Prema Janmaya, can awaken one's love of Godhead. And the deity worship, we see many examples. In Sri Mayapur, we are fortunate to have 2 exalted souls, liberated souls, Pankajangari Prabhu Janini Vasdas Brahmachari, who've given their life, majority of their life. Now they're in their 70s. They've been worshipping Sri Sri Radha Madhav, Ashtashaki, in Mayapur for close to 45 years. And the Archana Siddhi, the awakening of pure love of Godhead, love for the deity, love for Krishna as a result of worship of the deity. So they're very ideal examples. And similarly at home, Grihastha, devotees, by regular worship of the deities can develop great attachment. Often devotees share that they dream about their deities because the practical action, the practical behavior, the practices of worshipping the deity, making offering, making arati, dressing, doing the archana. These activities, they have a great impression on the mind, on the subtle body, and that carries, that remains with the devotee throughout the day. So by regular deity worship, one can very easily remember the Supreme Lord. I was fortunate in my years of training in Krishna consciousness in Melbourne Mahaprabhu Mandir to be able to regularly worship the deities of Srisi Gaurnitai in the morning before we would go on Sankirtan. One time His Holiness Tamal Krishna Goswami commented when he was giving class in Melbourne Mahaprabhu Mandir that as he looked and glanced at Srisi Gaurnitai, he commented, definitely the most merciful Gaurnitai deities in ISKCON. Actually, they were the largest Gaurnitai, Ashtadhatu, 8 auspicious metals. They were the largest Gaurnitai deities in ISKCON prior to the installation of the Sri Panchatattva in Mayapur, very special deities. And along with another brahmachari, in the morning we would go in after Mangaladi and we would bathe Sri Sri Gaurnitai and polish them. Then we used a mixture of lemon juice and tilak, and we would polish the bodies of the Lord, and they would shine. After polishing, they would shine brilliantly, and we would also put the tilak and Thai kopin, and then Matajis would come, and then they would beautifully dress Gaurnitai. So after that little seva of worshipping Gaurnitai in the morning, I would go on Sankirtan. And during the day on Sankirtan, practically speaking, because of polishing the body of the Lord, a little bit of the oil and the tilak would the fragrance would create a fragrance mixed with a slight chemical oxidization. It's like oxidization. It's a slight. It would the fragrance. And the substance would remain on my hands, and throughout the day, I would just smell and be able to remember Gaurnitai. And in this way, the deity worship, because it involves so many of your senses, literally. Like for example, you can see the worship of Sri Jagannath. In Jagannath Puri, there is a Pandu Vijay, when the pujaris are carrying Lord Jagannath, 10, 15 men, huge, strongly built fellows. And literally they're rubbing so closely up to Lord Jagannath and associating with him. This is the facility that deity worship provides. Also an experience comes to mind. We were in Narshindi, ISKCON Narshindi in Purva Bengal, Bangladesh. Recently we were celebrating Snan Jatra there. And that also is a very Anandamoy Utsav, full of joy. And we would bathe Lord Jagannath, but devotees, we were all completely drenched. Similarly, in our Sridham Mayapur, we have Snan Jatra at Rajapur. And also in Mayapur, we have 2 Snan Yatras. In the morning, a Rajapur, and in the afternoon, our land department devotees organize a very wonderful Snan Yatra festival on the bank of Ganga. And in that festival, the devotees, we can actually, because we're right on bank of Ganga, so the large pots are there, and devotees can go to Ganga, fill the pot take bath, fill the pot with water, and then come join the queue, not a very long queue, a few devotees, and then pour that Ganga Jal directly on Lord Jagannath. So as well, of course, that is the hot season in Bengal, so it's a very ecstatic festival and a very wonderful time. And bathing Lord Jagannath, similarly the one's clothes are drenched. After that festival, your clothes are drenched, dripping wet in the Charanamrit. This is deity worship. One can literally, with his senses, can associate with the Lord, can experience the Lord in his vapu and associate. And that's very powerful, has a wonderful, deep impression on the mind, either worshipping small deities or worshipping large deities. Prabhupada emphasized, he encouraged so much. Even though Nam Sankirtan is the Jugadharma, Jagya Sankirtana Praya Yajanti Hi. I'm worshipped, Yajanti Hi, Shumedasaha, by intelligent people in the Kali Yuga by performance of Sankirtan. However, Prabhupada was so enthusiastic to open temples, large temples, Radha Krishna temples, all over the world, because he understood how necessary the worship of the deity is for purifying the mind, for purifying the body. In the next verse, Krishna takes a very practical approach that Mama Anushmana Yudhyacha, not simply that we are sitting doing nothing and just trying to remember Krishna all day, but Mama Anushmara, remember Krishna Yudhya, and engage in one's prescribed activities. In this case, particularly for Arjuna, Yudhya means fight. Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu Mama Anushmara Yudhyacha maya repita mano buddhir mami vaishashya shangshayaha. Sarveshu kaleshu, constantly, at all times. Mama nushmara, remember me, yudya cha, and, Prabhupada comments, at the same time carry out your prescribed duty, in this case, in Arjuna's case, of fighting. Mayarpita mano bhutir, with your activities dedicated to me, your mind and intelligence fixed on me, mame vaishashi ashangshayaha, you will attain me without doubt. Prabhupada's commenting, Arjuna is fighting. That is also Krishna consciousness. Mam anushmana yudya cha. Krishna says, you chant, you remember me. At the same time, fight. He never said simply fight. He never said simply chant. Because in the material world, that is not possible. Therefore, chanting must be there, but at the same time, you have to work on how to continue this movement. So in this way, either we may be working directly in the temple as a full-time missionary, or we may be serving, pujari, or temple administrator, or preacher. And in this way, we carry on with our prescribed duty, and we remember Krishna. For those who are engaged full-time in the missionary life, it is easier to remember Krishna because the activities are connected to Krishna in a direct way. Not necessarily everyone has the opportunity to be engaged in the missionary at work. Therefore, those who are in congregation, it may be going to office, maybe going to the business, etc., or household duties at home. So these duties are also the dharmic activity of the grihastha. One has to perform his occupation. And that can be done in such a way that he remembers Krishna whilst he's performing these activities. I remember years ago we were collecting funds for the temples, and also we were doing businesses. And I would constantly, this is in the years, the yuga before digital recordings and smartphones, etc. And I would have slokas. I would have slokas written down that I would be studying, and I would have them in my pocket. And at any moment, when I had time, either waiting in a line or waiting to see somebody, or we often were traveling and we were in long immigration queues, I would learn many slokas just waiting in immigration queues, just standing and reading the sloka. And in this way, one is thinking of Krishna throughout the day. One can now very comfortably, one can constantly be hearing about Krishna if one's work enables ones to enables ones to be able to hear at the same time. He can hear and do his work, or on occasion he can hear during the lunch break or traveling to and from work. And this way one has to become a little enthusiastic to be able to develop ways to be able to remember Krishna during the day, and in that way he can progress in his Krishna consciousness. This is the practice. One has to practice remembering Krishna. Abhyasha yoga juktena chetasa na annagamena paramam purusham divyam jati parta anuchintayam. Abhyasa yoga juktena. One has to remain connected. One has to practice. Abhyas means practice. Abhyas means also habits. Abhyasa yoga jukta. The abhyas yoga, the yoga of practically connecting oneself to the Supreme. One has to remain connected in that way. Abhyasa yoga juktena. Prabhupada translates. He who meditates on me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his mind constantly engaged in remembering me. That has to be done by effort, by practice. In the sadhana practice, abhyas yoga also means sadhana. We're chanting Hare Krishna, we're chanting, we're regulated, we're bowing down, we're seeing the deity, we're various activities of devotional service, serving prasadam, cooking prasadam. This is all abhyas yoga. Whilst doing these activities, we have to remember Krishna. That is the practice. Smartavyam satatam Vishnu, Bhishmatavnanu jatu shit. Sarva viti nishedayo etayo evakinkara in Padma Purana, quoted by Rupa Goswami, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Sarva viti nished etayo evakinkara is the purpose of all the rules and regulations. The purpose of all of the prescribed duties is smartavyam satatam Vishnu, remembering Krishna, Vishmatavya and never forgetting him at any moment. So sadhana practice actually means remembering Krishna. Whilst we're performing these activities, we have to remember Krishna. That is the abhyas yoga. That is the practice. Chetasa na annagamana. Even though the mind, annagamana, goes in different directions, the consciousness will be attracted and deviate different. You have to bring it back. Abhyas yoga. That is the practice of Krishna consciousness. An advanced devotee is a devotee who's remembering Krishna extensively, constantly. And eventually, as a result of the practice, one can awaken natural remembrance of Krishna, so much so that one doesn't forget Krishna, like the Goswamis. Premon madhavashada sheshadashaya grashto pramato sada. Grasto means haunted, haunted, like they can never forget Krishna. They can even you try, you cannot forget Krishna. Grasto pramato, completely mad, prem onmad, with love, having awakened by practicing devotional service and awakening real affection, reviving one's affection, awakening real love for Krishna. Then very naturally one cannot forget Krishna. This is the perfection which can be awakened by a proper practice of sadhana. Prabhupada's commenting, if you think of Krishna 24 hours, then you become fully Krishna conscious and your life is successful. Don't allow anything. This requires a little practice. Abhyasa jagajuktena chetasa na annagamana. I should not allow my mind to go to think of any other subject than Krishna. Prabhupada gives a beautiful analogy in the purport to text number 8. The mind is fickle, and therefore it is necessary to engage the mind by force to think of Krishna. One example often given is that of the caterpillar that thinks of becoming a butterfly and so is transformed into a butterfly in the same life. Similarly, if we constantly think of Krishna, it is certain that at the end of our lives we shall have the same bodily constitution as Krishna. So Krishna consciousness means transforming ourselves from a caterpillar to a butterfly. And this is possible by enthusiastic practice of the Krishna conscious lifestyle, associating with devotees, chanting Hare Krishna, hearing, serving, preaching. One can become a transcendental butterfly. It is possible. And in that way one can perfect one's life. Let's have a look at an overview of the 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. See what's going on. Akshara Brahma Yoga, attaining the Supreme. Krishna answers Arjuna's, of the 8 topics, 7 are mentioned and discussed in the first 4 verses. The final topic of remembering Krishna at the time of death is explained throughout the remainder of the chapter, specifically in the following categories: remembering Krishna at the time of death, Yoga Mishra Bhakti, verses 10 to 13, Bhruvi Madrei, Krishna describes the Satchakra Yoga system of raising the consciousness through the 6 chakras, fixing the consciousness between the eyebrows, and then leaving the body according to the desire of the yogi. This is Jog Siddha Satchakra Yoga system, described as Yoga Mishra Bhakti. And then pure devotional service, we'll take a look at shortly, verses 14 to 16, comparing the spiritual and the material worlds, and then again attaining the Supreme through the yogic process. Krishna concludes the 8th chapter by explaining. So the topic of Ananda Bhakti is introduced in this section of Bhagavad Gita, and you can see the term Ananda meaning pure devotional service or unmixed, unalloyed, pure devotional service, Ananda without any mix. And the term Ananda is mentioned in several places over the subsequent chapters. Ananda Cheta, without deviating the mind. Bhakta Tvanannaya, unalloyed devotion. Bhajanti Ananda Manasa, fully engaged in devotional service. Anandaschintayandamam, exclusive devotion. Ananda Bhag, without deviation. Bhakta Tvanannaya, unalloyed, undivided devotional service. Ananda Jogena Bhakti, unalloyed devotional service. Let's take a look at text number 14, where the term Ananda Bhakti is first mentioned in Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Text 14. Ananda Cheta Satatam Yomam Shmarniti Nitya Saha Tashaham Sulabhaparta Nitya Jukta Shajogina. For one who always remembers me without deviation, I am easy to obtain. Tashaham Sulabhaparta. Tashaham, for them, Sulabha is very easy to attain me. Nitya Jukta Shajogina, because they're constantly connected to me, they're constantly practicing remembrance of me. Ananda Cheta Satatam Yomam Smarati Nitya Saha, constantly remembering me. Ananda Cheta, without any other interest, without deviation of the mind. In the purport, Prabhupada speaks very wonderfully about Vrindavan consciousness. The special qualification of the pure devotee is that he is always thinking of Krishna without deviation and without considering the time or the place. There should be no impediments. He should be able to carry out his service anywhere, at any time. Some say that the devotee should remain in holy places like Vrindavan or some holy town where the Lord lived, but a pure devotee can live anywhere and create the atmosphere of Vrindavan by his devotional service. It was Sri Advaita who told Lord Chaitanya, "Wherever you are, O Lord, there is Vrindavan." Prabhupada's commenting whilst lecturing on this section of verses in 1966, as having just arrived in the West and in New York. You can imagine Prabhupada's early experience of being in America would have been, to say the culture shock, to say the least, completely. In New York in 1966, so completely different from Prabhupada's lifestyle in India. However, Prabhupada's commenting that he's carrying that Vrindavan atmosphere with him. Satadam means anywhere, anytime, just like my residence is at Vrindavan. My residence is at Vrindavan. Radha Damodar temple, Prabhupada commented, is his eternal residence. That is the place of Krishna. Now I am in America, in your country, but that does not mean I'm out of Vrindavan, because if I think of Krishna always, so it is as good as I'm in India, in Vrindavan. Prabhupada ki jai. Prabhupada carries on about Vrindavan consciousness. That is our Krishna consciousness life. Krishna wants it, I must do it. I will not do anything for me. Krishna wants it, I must do it. That is Vrindavan. All the inhabitants of Vrindavan, they are trying to fulfill Krishna's desire. The cowherd boys, the calves, the cows, the trees, the flowers, the water, the gopis, the elderly inhabitants, Mother Jasoda and Nanda, they are all engaged in fulfilling Krishna's desire. That is Vrindavan. So you can turn this material world into Vrindavan, provided you agree to fulfill the desires of Krishna. That is Vrindavan. There's one famous lecture Prabhupada gave in Melbourne, Australia, actually at the installation of the deities, Gornitai. Prabhupada sitting on the Vyasasana, and he comments, the people of Melbourne have become fortunate because Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has appeared here. In such a sober way, Prabhupada said. And then Prabhupada carries on to explain, just continue with service in the temple. Sitting in Melbourne Mahaprabhu Mandir, and Prabhupada said, this temple is not Melbourne, it is Vaikuntha. And then he said, this temple is not Melbourne, it is Vrindavan. Just remain in service in the temple and you'll always be in Vrindavan. Prabhupada ki. Tashaham sulabhaparta, for that person who's endeavoring, abhyasha yoga jukta chetasa na anagamana, not allowing his mind to go here and there, not allowing the pushings of the mind and senses to deviate him, constantly practicing, endeavoring to serve Krishna, remember Krishna. For that person, tashaham, for them, sulabhaparta, I'm very easy to attain. Krishna reciprocates tremendously with a devotee who's sincerely practicing Bhagavad Bhakti. The Lord is merciful to all, but as we have already explained, He is especially inclined toward those who always serve Him without deviation. The Lord helps such devotees in various ways. The next few verses, 15, 16, begin to give a comparison. Krishna is giving a comparison now of the spiritual world and the material world. Brahma bhuvana loka puna avartino juna. So this material world is characterized by the puna avartino. Again there is returning, coming and going. However, distinctly different in the spiritual world, mamu petya, having attained that eternal abode, which Krishna described in the earlier verses, sa prayati samad bhavan, he attains that eternal abode. Here Krishna is explaining the qualification, the characteristics of that eternal abode. Mamu petya tukunteya, having attained me, punajanma na vijite. Punajanma. There is no imposed birth in the spiritual world. Of course, the argument may come, well, how is it that we came from the spiritual world to the material world? Well, the fact is that the living entity has independence, and those of us who misuse that independence have come here to the material world. So how is it that Krishna says punajanma na vidyate, if we've come to the material world from the spiritual world? It is not imposed. Punajanma na vidyate means that it's not compulsory, like it is in the material world. Dhruvam janma mritashyata. Everyone who takes birth in the material world without exception dies, and then take birth again. So this is imposed repeated birth and death. But punajanma na vidyate, in the spiritual world, if one desires, he can remain there eternally without changing his body in the eternal service of Sri Krishna. Krishna goes on to explain in more detail, and Prabhupada elaborates in his purport the significance of puna avartino, again returning. In the day they receive various bodies from material activities, and at night they no longer have bodies but remain compact in the body of Vishnu. Then again, they are manifest at the arrival of Brahma's day. So the conditioned souls in the material world, those who are unfortunately not cultivating their spiritual life and reviving their Krishna consciousness, remain in this material world. The various manifestations, there is Mahakalpa, that is a creation in the material world. There is Vikalpa, that is a creation in the life of Brahma. And there is the Kalpa, that is creation each day of Lord Brahma. So after each of these Kalpas, there is annihilation. Lord Brahma's daily annihilation is a partial annihilation. At the end of the Vikalpa, there is end of the life of Lord Brahma, this universe comes to an end. That is the Vikalpa, there is annihilation. And then there is a complete annihilation at the material world, sometimes manifest, sometimes not, the Mahakalpa. So in these various states of unmanifest state, the living entities are merged in the body of Lord Vishnu. And they remain Sutuptanaya state. They remain there endlessly. And then when the various manifestations, Mahakalpa, Vikalpa, Kalpa, appearing, living entities are again, they are injected into the material energy through the glance of Mahavishnu, Shambhu, and in that way they accept different bodies, and in this way constantly coming and going in this material world. Ultimately, Prabhupada's commenting, ultimately when Brahma's life is finished, they are all annihilated and remain unmanifest for millions and millions of years. And when Brahma is born again, in another millennium, they are again manifest. In this way, they are captivated by the spell of the material world. And of course, all this we forget. We forget, and we're thinking that this life is everything. And this is the power, the bewildering power of this material nature. Such forgetfulness, such avidya shakti, maya shakti, vismriti, that we completely forget. And we think that this is everything, this life is everything. And the spell, mama maya duratyaya, the potency of this material nature, material energy. Therefore, mameviya prapadyante, the only hope is to take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in order to get relief from this illusion. Enechi oshod maya nashi baro lage. I bought the medicine, Mahaprabhu says, to dissipate this illusion. Harinama mahamantra lautumi mage. I'm begging you, take this mahamantra. So in text 16 to 19, the material world are described, and then in text 20 to 22, Krishna describes the spiritual world. Some of the words that Krishna uses to describe the spiritual nature are very descriptive. In verse 20, Sanatana, eternal, na vinashati, is never annihilated. In text 21, Paramam Gatim, the supreme destination. Tat Dharma Paramamama, that is my supreme abode. Bhakta Labbhastvanannaya, which is attainable by unalloyed devotion. So the remaining verses of the chapter, Krishna goes on to explain the process of attaining liberation as followed by the mystic yogis. And he's explaining that by jnanis, karmis and yogis, they must leave at a suitable time. Verses 23 to 26 are describing. If the yogi is able to, this is the process of the Chakra Yoga system, that by raising the awareness, generally, one time one yogi teacher was explaining to me how the advantage of the human form of life as compared to the animal species. The chakras are there in the animal species, but because of the nature of the body, they're unable to practice any method of evolving through the various chakras. But in the human body, the chakras are all in a line, one above each other. And by the practice of meditation and sense control and Ashtanga Yoga, one can raise the consciousness, which for most conditioned souls, the consciousness is in the lower areas, in the Muladhara chakra, where we're simply interested in eating and sex and evacuating. And these are the consciousnesses generally hovering around that area. One has to raise the consciousness through the various chakras. One is able to do that, to bring the consciousness of Bhruva Madhya, Agya chakra between the eyebrows and then to the top of the head. This takes many, many, many years. Pantashtrikoti Saravat Sarasampragam Yoda Vayodatapi Manaso Muni Pungavanam. The Vayodatapi by pranayam, and by the munis are practicing the Shat Chakra Yoga system. But this on this path, Pantashtu koti shatabhatshara. Koti shata means millions, hundreds of millions of years of practice to perfect the Ashtanga Yoga system and bring the consciousness to the top of the head. Very difficult. So the yogi, he's able to do this. He can achieve the perfection of being able to leave his body according to his own will. This is elaborately described in Prabhupada's book, Easy Journey to Other Planets, for those of you who would like to read in more detail. The yogi can perfect this system and then leave the body at a selected specified time, meditating on the specific destination, either moon planet or Svarga, Siddhaloka, and he can attain that planet. Here Krishna is explaining the process of attaining liberation by the yogis. If he leaves his body during the influence of the fiery god in the light at an auspicious moment of the day, during the fortnight of the waxing moon, during the 6 months when the sun travels in the north, Prabhupada comments, if one leaves the body at the time designated above, either accidentally or by arrangement, it's possible for him to attain the impersonal Brahma Jyoti. However, the yogi who leaves his body during the night, in the fortnight of the waning moon, in the 6 months when the sun passes to the south, he reaches the moon planet and then again comes back. Kshanei punyamata logam vishanti, as Krishna explained in the 9th chapter, that attaining the heavenly planets, one can remain there for some time. Kshanei punya, one's accumulated credit is exhausted, marcha logam vishanti, and he has to return to the earth planet again. Prabhupada's commenting, text 23, purport, if the yogi is perfect, he can select the time and situation for leaving the material world, but if he is not so expert, his success depends on the accidentally passing away at a certain suitable time. And regarding the devotee's concern in this matter, Krishna comments, although the devotees know these two paths, O Arjuna, they are never bewildered, therefore always be fixed in devotion. A devotee should know that concern over these two paths is troublesome. The best way to be absorbed in Krishna consciousness is to be always dovetailed in his service, and this will make one's path to the spiritual kingdom safe, certain and direct. Abhyasha jagajuktina chetasa na annagamana. One should practice Krishna consciousness, but chetasa na annagamana, not engaging in other activities, constantly be engaging in one or another of the activities of Krishna consciousness, remembering Krishna, chanting about Krishna, hearing about Krishna, working for Krishna, serving Krishna. In any way, keep connected to Krishna by practicing, by remaining in this abhyasha jagajukta, connected to the Lord through this practice throughout one's life. Yati parta anuchintayam. Certainly one will attain the supreme destination of death. Prabhupada continues, he knows that his passage to the supreme abode is guaranteed by devotional service, as Krishna himself confirms in this chapter in so many places. How by practicing Ananda Bhakti, and even we may not be on the level of constantly remembering Krishna without deviation, so what we're doing is we practice sadhana bhakti. We seriously follow the orders of the spiritual master and the Shastra and mold our life around the practice of sadhana bhakti. And similarly, one's sadhana practice will mature to mature love of Godhead, and in that way, Krishna guarantees on this path of Ananda Bhakti, Uttam Bhakti, Krishna guarantees that he will attain the supreme destination in so many places in this chapter. And text 5, yet once attains my nature, of this there is no doubt. Text 7, he will attain me without doubt. Text 8, he is sure to reach me. Text 14, I am easy to obtain. Text 22, I am obtained by unalloyed devotion. So Prabhupada is concluding in the 28th verse of the chapter, in the purport. Prabhupada comments that in chapter 7 through chapter 12 are the essence of Bhagavad Gita. The first 6 and last 6 chapters are like coverings for the middle 6 chapters, which are especially protected by the Lord. If one is fortunate enough to understand Bhagavad Gita, especially these middle 6 chapters in the association of devotees, then his life at once becomes glorified beyond all penances, sacrifices, charities, speculations, etc. For one can achieve all the results of these activities simply by Krishna consciousness. In this chapter, Akshay Brahma Yoga, attaining the Supreme. We were discussing the standard principles of transmigration. We were discussing the process of Ananda Bhakti, constantly remembering Krishna, and how by practice of Ananda Bhakti one is sure to reach the Supreme Abode. Hare Krishna.